If you would like a free newsletter on this or other subjects, just give us a call at Christian Answers. The phone number is area code 512-218-8022. That's 512-218-8022. Or you could email us at cdebater@aol.com. That's cdebater@aol.com. Thank you.
My name is Mike Gerard. I'm a medical physician from the New Orleans area, and I've stopped my medical practice now to go around full-time and do Christian apologetics to present scientific and historical evidence that biblical Christianity is true. The way I got involved with it is that as a medical physician, you hear a lot of different questions. And the first question that everybody asks when they come to see a physician is this: Doc, am I going to die? And the truth of the matter is that the answer is yes. I trained in anesthesiology. I did CPR. I participated in a lot of codes. I taught CPR. And the ugly truth is that doctors don't save lives. We just delay death. And I realized after doing this over and over again and seeing people die in front of me that as a medical physician, there was no cure for death. Medical hospitals, medical physicians, medical research laboratories do not have a cure for death. And looking at the Bible and seeing what it said, there was a man about 2,000 years ago who said that he had a cure for death, and better yet, he would put up a shut-up, and 3 days after he died, get up out the grave. Now, skeptics and people who have investigated the evidence for whether or not Jesus Christ did get up out the grave have called it one of the best established facts in history. Men who are experts in history, men who are experts in evidence, evidential law, have looked at that evidence and have come to the conclusion that, beyond any shadow of a doubt, Jesus Christ did get up out the grave. Well, if that's true, then there is a man who did defeat death. And that what I was doing as a medical physician, trying to encourage people, to come to me so that I could save their life, just wasn't true. But there was indeed a cure for death, and that was through Jesus Christ. And I went out and I started sharing that with people. Hey, doctors don't save lives. We just delay death. But this man, Jesus Christ, promises absolutely free a cure for death. And the evidence is overwhelming to present it. The only problem is that when I started presenting that to people, they would look at that evidence, look at the evidence for the resurrection, and they would come back and say, well, Dr. Gerard, I have trouble believing the whole Bible. And when I asked them why, they would always say the same things. They'd say, well, the Bible says, very first verse, in the beginning God created, and I don't believe in that. I believe in a Big Bang explosion. And back there at that time, I agreed with them. Well, I believe in a Big Bang explosion too. And they would say, well, Dr. Gerard, I don't believe Adam and Eve were the first man and the first woman. I believe in 8 men. And back then at that time, I said, well, I do also. They would always say, well, Dr. Gerard, I don't believe there was a worldwide flood that destroyed everything. And I said, well, I don't believe it either. And they would always end up with the same thing. If God lies in the very first verse, how can you trust any of the rest of it? If the Bible lies in the very first verse, what else would you be willing to believe? So I went out and I started looking to see if there was any scientific evidence to support the first book of the Bible, especially those first 11 chapters that talked about creation, the creation of the first man, whether or not there was any evidence to support a worldwide flood. Got in touch with a group of scientists out in California at the Institute for Creation Research who provided scientific evidence to support the biblical statement about what Genesis said. And I was amazed because I really expected to get a book on religion, and that's not what I got. What I got was a book on science. I especially remember Dr. Duane Gish's book, Evolution, Challenge of the Fossil Record, where he took the fossil record and he went ahead and he said, let's look at all the evidence. Let's look at the evidence that's not presented in textbooks. Let's look and see what the evolutionary scientists are saying. Read that book in about 2 weeks, checked all of his references, and in 2 weeks, I destroyed about 20 years of education. And the thing that amazed me is that there is so much evidence that contradicts evolution, that supports biblical creation, so much scientific evidence that just doesn't make it into the textbooks, that just doesn't make it into the college classrooms, that I was really amazed. And I started out going and presenting this evidence to people. And when people would say, well, Dr. Rod, I understand what you're saying about the Bible, but what about the book of Genesis? I would show them the scientific evidence. I would support what I'd been, I would deny what I'd been taught in school. And it made a tremendous difference on their willingness to consider the Bible. Now let me say this, science is not history. The world's greatest philosopher in science, Sir Karl Popper, has said that science cannot prove history. However, science can comment on history. And I would just challenge any of you and just make this proposal. There is enough scientific evidence, overwhelming scientific evidence, to overturn everything you have been taught, are being taught, will be taught about evolution, that evidence is overwhelming. You should consider that. Evidence, which evidence? I had always been taught the 5 pillars of evolution, the 5 evidences that are found in most textbooks. They always start with the fossil record. Spoke with a graduate student from Tulane University a couple of months ago working on her master's degree. She got a degree from Tulane in biology. And I asked her, I said, Dolan, what is your best evidence for evolution? And she said, well, my best evidence for evolution would be the fossil record. I said, what in the fossil record would compel you to believe in evolution? She said, well, all the transitional forms. I said, well, wait a minute. Let's look and see what the evolutionary scientists have to say about transitional forms. So I quoted to her Stephen Jay Gould, vehement anti-creationist, somebody who refuses to debate creationists, even though he writes, as the editor of Nature magazine, articles against them. Stephen Jay Gould said that the absence of fossil intermediaries is the trade secret of paleontology. Now, Gould is an evolutionist, but Gould says that there are no transitional forms. In fact, it was based upon that lack of evidence that Gould developed his theory of punctuated equilibrium. Dr. Colin Patterson, probably the world's most respected paleontologist, one of the world's foremost experts in the fossil record, senior paleontologist at the British Natural History Museum, Colin Patterson wrote a book on evolution. Well, an American scientist wrote to him and said, Dr. Patterson, you wrote a beautiful book on evolution, but you didn't include any evidence. Where's the beef? Where's the evidence for this? And Patterson wrote back to this man and he said, I agree with your comments that my book has no evidence for fossil intermediaries in the fossil record. He said, if I knew of any, living or fossil, I would certainly have included it. He said, I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. Here's a senior paleontologist of the British Natural History Museum who's saying that there is no fossil evidence in the fossil record for evolution. This man is an evolutionist. David B. Kitts, another paleontologist. Kitts says that that evolution requires intermediate forms, but paleontology fails to provide them. Total lack of evidence. That's what prompted Mark Ridley to conclude, no evolutionist uses the fossil record to argue evolution over special creation. These men that I just quoted to you are all evolutionists, and they all say that there is no evidence in that fossil record for evolution. It's amazing that when you look at what the evolutionary scientists say, when you go to the journal articles, when you step outside of the textbooks, past what they're teaching you in school, you find some evidence that you're not being exposed to. And it's not that the evidence isn't well known. These things are very, very vehemently debated. When Colin Patterson went to New York in 1981, he stood up in front of a group of paleontologists and he said, listen, there is no fossil evidence for evolution. He says, does anybody in this audience know of any fossil evidence? Nobody in the audience challenged him. Now, that might have been because of his stature, but just the fact that he is such a well-respected paleontologist speaks worlds for what he's saying. So when you look at the evidence, when you look at the journal articles, you find that what you're being presented at in the classrooms is a little bit different. And that's one of the problems with evidence. No matter how much evidence you're presented, you don't know how much evidence is being withheld, how much evidence is either not being given to you, or how much evidence may be falsified, or worse yet, how much evidence you don't even have. Whenever you deal with anything, especially science, and especially reporting of science, like we're dependent upon when we look at textbooks and journal articles, whenever you're looking at evidence, you need to remember that evidence always has 3 problem areas. Evidence is always incomplete, evidence may be withheld, and unfortunately, evidence may be faked. That's why I would just challenge you to question everything that's being taught in class, and especially from the aspect of whether or not you're getting all the information.
Check out our websites, BibleQuery.org. This site answers 7,700 Bible questions. HistoryCart.com. This site reveals early church history and doctrine, proving Roman Catholicism is not historically or doctrinally viable. MuslimHope.com. This site is a classic refutation of Islam, a counterfeit religion created by Muhammad. Free newsletters are also available. To see the 1-hour version of this video, go to yahoovideo.com. Type in the name Larry Wessels.